I'm holding a book by Bill Salus called Psalm 83. Not everybody agrees with the fundamental premise of Psalm 83. Right, Bill?
I've encountered all kinds of different objections to my teaching on that. It's very exhaustive research. I worked on this thinking for about 8 to 9 years. The thinking is, one, it's just simply an imprecatory prayer. The other one is just, maybe it's just part of Ezekiel 38, more details from a different camera angle. Other people think maybe it's already been fulfilled in the wars of 1948, perhaps 1967, etc.
Let me just say that Bill has talked about Psalm 83 as an imprecatory prayer. In other words, Asaph is praying that God will fend off this particular list of enemies. And in fact, it is an imprecatory prayer, but it's also a prophecy, because this group of people is very much a contemporary group of people.
Right. So he lists in Psalm 83 verses 6 through 8 by their ancient names: Edomites and Ammonites and Moabites and gigabytes and termites and megabytes. And all the ites you can throw in. Of course, they didn't have megabytes back then.
Right.
But he lists them in their ancient name in the vernacular of his time. But we can extrapolate who they are today. They are an inner circle of countries that would be from Lebanon to Syria, parts of Iraq, Jordan, probably part of Saudi Arabia, probably Egypt, Philistia, which is where the Hamas are. There's terrorist populations of Hezbollah and Hamas inside of there. Of course, Syria is at war with Israel presently.
So the question is, can this be viewed as a contemporary prophecy?
It can, because it's not a chronological list of Israel's enemies, because they had many more enemies throughout time. It's a contemporary group of that come together and says they come together, they form crafty counsel, a devious plan, with the goal of cutting the nation off that the name of Israel can be remembered no more. And then it goes on to tell us who they are. And then it says, and what's really critically important, and why I tell people I don't believe it happened in 1948, because those countries I just mentioned did come against Israel in 1948. That's why some people think, well, it was finally fulfilled there. But there's verses 9 through 18 that have to be rectified as well. Actually 6 through 18. And Asaph petitions God how he wants them to deal with them. Why don't you read, if you can, Psalm 83 verses 9 through 12.
Well, verses 9 through 12 says, and again, this is Asaph talking, "Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kishon, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeeb, and their princes as Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take ourselves the houses of God in possession." In other words, these enemies tried to take everything Israel had, including Israel's house of God. And Asaph is saying, these men were all defeated. Please, God, repeat what you did against these people who tried to take everything we have.
That's right. And then when the time Asaph wrote, around 3,000 years ago, of course, they had in their history, the Lord intervened and parted the Red Seas and took out the Egyptians. But from that time between the Exodus to Asaph's time with King David, he had the books of Judges, you had these actual wars where the Israeli defense forces were involved. So he takes our attention back to Midian and Sisera. Well, now you're dealing with the Midianites, Gideon and his 300-man army.
Right.
So you go back to the book of Judges, chapters 4 through 8, and you get the history of what Asaph's trying to draw our attention to. Gideon with his 300-man army, the Midianites that oppressed the Jews for 7 years. Gideon was told that oppression is going to stop. And so he took his 300 men with the help of the tribe of Ephraim, and they killed 120,000 Midianites. They killed Oreb and Zeeb and Zalmunna. These are the princes and the kings. They took them all out, the infantry, the kings, the leaders.
Right.
And the Midianites never oppressed the Jews again. Now the Arabs right now, they came back against the Jews in 1967, so it didn't end in 1948. They still oppressed the Jews in 67. 1973, they're still oppressing the Jews right now. Syria is at war with them. Hezbollah's got missiles pointed at them, Hamas as well. And also, the book of Judges, when he talked about Jabin and Sisera, the Canaanites. Jabin was the Canaanite king. They had oppressed the Jews for 20 years, and the prophetess Deborah got her general Barak to go defeat the Canaanites, and they never oppressed the Jews again. So what Asaph is saying here is that God deal with them through empowering the Israeli defense forces, that they would win a war, take out the infantry, the leaders, and everyone, so that they could never oppress them again. And if you go through the rest of the verses, and I won't, we'll just summarize it. He goes on and says, make them like whirling dust, chaff before the wind, stubble like burning wood, blazing mountain fire like the tempest before the storm. And I think if you read verse 17 and 18, we'll conclude it with that to say this is why this is not happening.
And again, this is the conclusion of the imprecatory prayer. And it concludes, by the way, with the name Jehovah, all caps in the King James Bible. That is the name of God. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. What a capper.
So who's he talking about? He's saying, let them be the whirling dust, the chaff before the wind. Deal with them like you did with the book of Judges, with the Midianites and the Canaanites. Let them be confounded, ashamed, and perish. Okay. Now they have not been confounded and shamed and perished. Matter of fact, they've been a problem for Israel. Israel's building walls around themselves for protection against these enemies. So there's just another argument why it hasn't found fulfillment. But I would say the final argument is there are a lot of peripheral prophecies related to these countries and populations involved in Psalm 83. Jordan's a subject of prophecies in Zephaniah 2 and Jeremiah 49, where the Israeli defense forces topple them. Syria, Isaiah 17 talks about the destruction of Damascus. The Palestinians in Obadiah 1 verses 18, they're taken out by the Israeli defense forces. The house of Joseph will be a flame, the house of Jacob a fire, but the house of Esau, Palestinian descendants in the lineage of Esau, shall be stubble, and no survivors shall remain in the house of Esau. And I go through in the Psalm 83 book, there's so many related peripheral prophecies that show the Israeli defense forces coming against them. And I'll close with the last one, which is one of your favorite verses. It says in Zechariah 12:2, Jerusalem will become a cup of trembling and by the surrounding nations when they try to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. And in Zechariah 12, verses 4 through 6, we find out those surrounding nations, not the nations at large, not the outer ring of Ezekiel 38, but the surrounding nations that happen to be listed in Psalm 83. He says to them that the Israeli defense forces, the captains or governors of Judah, will come against them. There'll be a battlefield, will be like a fire pan in the woodpile. The IDF will be like a fiery torch. The enemies around them will be like sheaves. They shall devour them on the right hand and on the left hand, talking about the nearness and proximity. But Jerusalem shall remain in its place again forever, Jerusalem. So, folks, I would just simply say Psalm 83 could be nothing but a prayer. It could be it's been fulfilled already. It could be part of Ezekiel 38. But for all the reasons I just shared, thank you for that, I don't think so.
And if you want to read more, the book is called Psalm 83 by Bill Salus.